Bill looks ready up here.
Bill's ready. He is absent, so I think
You called it.
I did.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's work session, this October 24th, 2023. We have a number of presentations that will be brought before us today, so I'm going to turn things over to our Finance Director to help kick us off.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman, Commissioners, County Manager. I have the pleasure of giving the pension presentation update. Dr. Tutterow usually gives this as chair of the Pension Board of Trustees. He is attending a funeral today, so he does send his apologies for missing, but he did want me to let the board know if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. He's happy to schedule a meeting or have a phone call with you to answer anything that you may have. Okay, so I just want to walk through this real quick. So you're going to get a little bit of a unique presentation from me because you're going to get me as one of the members of the Board of Trustees and then me as the Chief Financial Officer. So you're going to get the county's perspective a little bit as well. But I want to run down our Board of Trustees, and this is our board for 2023. As I said, our chair is Dr. Roger Tutterow, Kennesaw State. Our vice chair is Sam Heaton. He's representing our retirees. And then our sheriff, Craig Owens, is serving as one of our Board of Trustees, and Jim Harner as our Chief Human Resource Officer, and myself round out the board. And I do want to thank Virgil Moon for his service to the board. He stepped down this past year, but he is with us, and he is always an active member in our meetings, so we do appreciate his advice and counsel. And then also our investment advisors is UBS. They've been a long-standing partner with the county, and they've done a fantastic job, and we're going to share some of those results. And then our trustee is Truist Bank, used to be SunTrust. Our actuaries are Kavanaugh McDonald, and our legal advisor is Troutman Sanders. So this is probably Roger's most important slide. He wants to caveat this is that we're basically in charge of the plan assets and the investment of those assets, not over the structure of the plan itself. So he just wants to share that with the board, as just reminding the Board of Trustees is charged with responsibility for the selection and retention of investment managers and the custodian for the assets of the pension plan and the retiree health care plan, also referred as the OPEB plan. And then we, the trustees, are also responsible for the approval of investment options available for employees for the defined contribution plan. So again, this is the plan's performance and not the plan design. Okay, so one of the things the county is very much aware of is our funding status of the pension plan. It is nowhere near where we'd like it to be. And several years ago, we adopted a plan, presented it to the rating agencies, and asked for their blessing of how we move forward with that. A partner in that is the Board of Trustees as we look at what our options are. But I do want to share how that funding ratio is affected. The Board of Commissioners have control over the design of the plan. That includes employee and employer contributions to the plan. The plan's performance of assets is controlled by the Board of Trustees or managed by the Board of Trustees. Compensation for the employees also affect the plan's performance and the funding. That is controlled by the Board of Commissioners. The retirement and mortality is, the retirement is controlled by the Board of Commissioners. The mortality is obviously just a factor of life. All right, so we have two very distinct sides of this plan. We have our old traditional plan, which was a 2.5% per year of service. And that was what we refer to as our old traditional plan. And back in 2014, we had 2,854 employees, active employees, still on that plan. At the end of 2022, that number has decreased to 1,468, and the employees have increased their employee contribution up to 8.75%, which was the max that was originally designed. Okay, the other side of that plan is the hybrid plan. This began in 2010, and this has a service factor of 1% per year of service. The employees contribute 3%, and then it also has the option for a defined contribution component where the employees contribute up to 4%, and the county will match 100% of that contribution. And that plan in 2014 had just over 1,200 active employees, and today that is at 2,714 employees. So we have definitely hit the crossroads now where the hybrid employees far outnumber the active employees for traditional. Okay, so I apologize for this graph. Yes, Commissioner?
I'm sorry, how many employees are on the old pension, did you say?
Yes, ma'am, I got it. It is on the traditional plan as of the end of 2022, there was 1,468 employees on the traditional, and there are 2,714 on the hybrid.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I want to share this graph with you. This is a very good history of the county's funding ratio for the pension plan. So back in 1997 was the peak of our funding. We were at 95%, and during that time, you'll see a steep decline down to 69%. A decision was made at that time to provide increase to the service factor from 1.5% to 2.5%, and it also had some retroactive impact. So it reduced our funding ratio, and then we can see we kind of moved along until the recession of 2008, where we hit a bottom of 52% funding. And we are today at 61, or at the end of 2022, we're at 60.1% funding. And we have a projection that we'll share in a later slide that's going to show you kind of where we are today, where we've been, but most importantly, where we want to go. All right. So again, the funding ratios graph on the left is something we've already shared, but the annual percentage change is something that's very important to us as we kind of walk through this. You can see the blue line is our assumed rate of return, which is 7.25% over the life of this plan. And you can see there's definitely years that the pension far out exceeds that, and we definitely have years where we underperform. 2022 was no exception to underperformance. Everybody's very much aware of the market in 2022. We had a 20% loss in 2022. But I wanted to round that out to show that that is not a continual trend. And the way our investment strategy with UBS is built and our active managers is to have bounce backs when we see those. So the concern would be is if the long-term return was less than 7.25, but it is far above that. But I want to share you a quick update through the end of September of 2023. We have a 17.21% return this year. So we've had a nice bounce back. And again, we're looking at this as a long-term, not a year-to-year impact. Speaking of long-term, the bottom line here is the projection of how we get to 100%, and the green line is where we are today. The most important part of that green line is above the red line. So just to show you again where we are today at 2022, even after a 20% reduction, bad year in 2022, no doubt, we maintained a 60% funding ratio, and our projection for the year was supposed to be 55.5. So we are exceeding projection, and with a strong return in 2023, we expect that to increase as we move forward. So just to kind of lay this out, in 21 years, we will hit 100% funding based on that red line, and in 14 years, we will hit an 80% funding. So this is a long-term plan. And 80% funding is considered a strong pension funding ratio, and that's really where our focus is how can we get to 80%? And the board has taken some proactive steps from the county's perspective of how we do that. Yes, we want to have good returns, and yes, we're working through the Board of Trustees and UBS to meet those returns, but the county has been able to contribute additional pension contributions for the last 9 years that have been above and beyond the annual required contribution. We've tried to do that on a reoccurring basis, and just to kind of put a number to that, since 2014, the county's contributed an additional $13.5 million to improve this funding ratio. Okay. All right, and then this kind of just puts the final slide here is to show you those results. I did want to show 2022 because that's what we're reporting on, but also show you kind of where we're trending for 2023. And that way, when we come back next year and present 2023, it's no surprise that things are looking good. It's been a volatile year for sure, but you can see the annual percentage change, again, for 2022 was -20. This year, we're at 17.21. But the big number to keep in mind is at the very bottom, since inception, through 2022, 7.57. As long as we are beating 7.25, we are coming out faster, better than projections. So again, that has improved through September 30 of 2023 to 7.71. So again, we expect to see that funding ratio increase as we move forward. So with that, Commissioners, do you have any questions for me? Any questions or comments I can pass on to Dr. Tutterow?
Yes. Thank you for your presentation, Bill. Do any of you have any questions?
Just thank you.
Thank you.
And when we get to 80%, I won't be here.
Let me just see if I will still be here. You know what? I don't know that I will still be here either. But if we get there, we'll all be very excited. So I'll promise you that.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So we're making some decisions that impact the hybrid employees right now.
Yes.
With respect to their program. How does that impact where we are today and where we're projected to be?
So the beauty of that is the decisions we're making is regarding vesture, and it's really on the defined contribution component of that. So
Okay.
where we look at that is the defined contribution component has no impact on this number whatsoever,
Okay.
because once the county has made the contribution, our obligation or liability has ended. So what that does is if we look at having a change to the vesture period of that, it again has no impact here. It would have an impact as far as how much, if an employee were to leave before vesture, that would come back into the plan to be reallocated out, reused. So it would not impact these numbers whatsoever.
Okay, so the management of those funds, is that just done internally outside of the pension board?
So because there is no liability after the contribution is made, there's no impact here, but what we do is manage the investment options for the employees. So working with UBS and the Board of Trustees, we provide investment options that employees can invest those funds in.
Okay.
And that's really the role of the pension board here, or the Board of Trustees, is just to review those options, make sure we're providing the best options available for the employees, and we do solicit feedback. And we've had meetings where employees have said, I would like to see an investment option of X, Y, Z. We run that through UBS, and we do have some conversations of, do we have any ability to change those? And we also review those based on performance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then from time to time, we've had inquiries with respect to COLA considerations for those in the pension program.
Yes.
And can you talk about the impact that could have?
Sure.
On this
And
as well.
that is a frequent question, and one of our standard answers to that is if we increase a COLA for retirees, that basically increases the amount of benefits that you would be paying out. It would have a negative impact on the funding ratio, and basically the story and the message that we're sending is, if we were at a very strong funding ratio, I think it'd be more palatable. While we're trying to get to a healthy funding ratio, it's a very difficult conversation, because in order to do that, we know you have no control of how the market performs. What that would obligate the board to do is make additional contributions to just maintain the trajectory that you're at today.
Okay.
But it is something that if the board wanted to pursue, we would have to calculate that impact and say, okay, if we did that, your annual contributions would go up by X dollars, and it is something that we could calculate.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Very good. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. So I believe next up, we're going to hear from our Deputy County Manager.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman, Commissioners, Madam County Manager. Our item this afternoon is to brief the board on the results of the Operational Performance Efficiency Review and Assessment, but also known as OPERA. This was the study where we looked at all of our county departments. 2 were chosen to go through an in-depth efficiency study. And we have Sarah Shermer here with us today from PFM that's going to run through a short slideshow. And then we also have both departments here in Mass as far as their leadership teams. They've all been very involved in this process, so they're anxious to see and hear as well as what y'all see and hear. So at this time, Sarah, would you like to do it?
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Shermer. I'm a managing director with PFM and one of the leads of this study. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to hear our findings and our recommendations. Jimmy just gave a great introduction, but as a brief reminder, this work that we're doing with the county is part of a multi-phase study. So in the first phase, we worked with the county and with the county leadership to determine which departments would be best primed for a review of this nature. And through that process, understanding which would be the most impactful, which were the highest priority, we worked with the county and with the board to identify the police department and the HR department as both the largest department in the county and the one that has some of the most interaction with other county departments and the most impactful for this assessment. Through the evaluation with both of those departments, we focused on looking at their mission, their priorities, the operational priorities that they were focusing on, their current and historical staffing and budget information, and then also their policies, their procedures, and internal controls that really guided their work, and finally looked at their operations and their outcomes. And the reports that we have provided to the board for each of the departments lay out our findings around those different areas and also a set of recommendations for moving forward within each department. In addition to the sort of operational and policy recommendations that we made, we also put forth a framework for performance management with both of those departments. And it's a useful framework for any of the departments within the county in looking at how do we think about performance management and managing the metrics and the outcomes of both of those departments. So I mentioned that this was part of a phased one approach, or the first phase was really the assessment approach in which we determined which departments were the highest priority. Phase 2 was doing these in-depth assessments of the police department and HR department. And then phase 3 is really for consideration of the board going forward, whether there are additional departments you'd like to have undertake a similar process going forward. And one of the final slides that I have in this presentation will lay out what we had recommended at the end of phase 1, again, for the board's consideration. We took a similar approach to developing findings and recommendations in both of those departments. First, looking at doing in-depth review of data that was provided by the departments and documents, administrative records that were provided by the departments. We also had the opportunity to talk to leadership, senior leadership, managers, and line-level staff in both of the departments, very comprehensively talking to people who were in all of the different divisions and bureaus and sort of organizational units within both departments. And then also in addition to talking to people within the departments, we also met with all the members of the board and other stakeholders in other county departments that interact frequently with the police department and with HR. And with the police department, we also had the chance to talk to some community-based service providers, the Cobb County Sheriff's Office, and the Neighborhood Safety Commission as well to get additional perspectives on both the expectations and experience of working with the police department. For both the police department, or one of the key ways that we do these types of assessments is to establish benchmark jurisdictions. So these are jurisdictions that are similar in size, demographics, and responsibility. And so the counties that we looked at to use as comparison purposes for HR and for police differ slightly, but are mostly focused in Georgia and a couple others in other jurisdictions that had similar levels of responsibility. Focusing first on the police department, as I mentioned in the first phase, a number of issues and questions came up out of the assessment process, and those questions really guided our research and our analysis of the police department. One of the top questions we looked at is what is the culture of the department? What's the internal environment? How does the culture of the department impact its operations? How does the department coordinate with other county departments? What does its coordination and its collaboration look like? Does the department have the capacity, both in terms of staff resources and dollar resources, to achieve its priorities? How is the department's experience with recruitment and retention compared to what we're seeing nationally? That is an issue that is top of mind for police departments and law enforcement across the country. What are some of the opportunities to improve the department's processes, to be more efficient, to be more effective? And then finally, how does the department use technology to guide its operations and integrate with other county systems? We had a number of findings. I want to highlight a few for you here today. Really, one of the foundational, as I mentioned, one of the guiding questions was looking at the culture of the department. And one of the foundational things that we saw is that there is a very strong foundation for looking at strategic planning, goal setting, and performance management within the department. There are established policies and procedures. The department historically has had a strategic plan and is looking ahead to using our findings and our recommendations in this report to inform its future strategic plan. And the elements of the strategic planning process trickle down through the different organizational units of the department. One of the things that we found is that the staffing, the department's current staffing is unable to cover all of the staffing beats that essentially its staffing plan. So the department breaks up the county into precincts, into beats, and determines how to staff those with patrol officers. The current deployment schedule is unable to be met with the current staffing levels. And to be very clear, this doesn't necessarily mean that the department doesn't have enough officers or is doing the wrong thing. What it really means is that the way it's trying to patrol the county is not aligning with its staffing. So the department has historically had vacancies, both within the sworn and unsworn roles, around 100 people any given year. The staffing vacancies today are a little bit higher than that, but are not so much higher to be the reason that it's having trouble staffing its current staffing plan. So although it has historical vacancies, there are other elements that are affecting its ability to staff. Some of those elements include the current staffing schedule. So the department utilizes a 10-hour schedule for a shift schedule, which is, there are different approaches to this across the country. We see 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour schedules, and one is not necessarily better or worse than the other, but choosing the right schedule for your department and for your department's needs and staffing needs is important to look at. Additionally, there's wide variety in calls for service across those different beats. So calls for service are one of the key ways that we measure the workload of a police department, the calls that are coming in that they have to respond to. And the way that the beat distribution currently exists across the county, you have some beats that are responding to, say, 1,000 calls within a given period, while other beats are responding to 15,000 calls. So there's great disparity across the different beats, and the staffing is not varied to meet the different needs. So you have some officers that are constantly responding to lots and lots and lots of calls, whereas other officers may not be responding to as many calls on any given day. We also looked at, as I mentioned, how the department interacts with other county departments. And one of the things that came up again and again is the police department's interactions with DPS and with HR as it relates to human resources matters. A lot of this is around payroll matters and other sort of benefits and other compensation issues. And there's a lack of clarity in many cases as to how information should flow, who the responsible party is, the appropriate length of time that it should take for certain things to happen. And it's not any single department, one or the other. Some of this is some changes that we know that there have been a lot of changes in recent time. Some of that is just needing to get more clear policies and practices around those things that are changing. But also, I think as with those changes that are occurring, there is a significant amount of confusion and essentially lack of agreement as to who is responsible for what, and that's eroding some of the department's trust. The officers and the staff of the department is eroding their trust in some of these administrative functions across the county. One of the other areas that we looked at are the policies and practices. And some of those, there are disagreements essentially between the way that the police department and E911 respond to certain types of calls. So DPS has established policies and practices that E911 and the police department both utilize, but because over time it has evolved that the practices are different in how they respond to different types of calls for service. So for example, if a certain type of call comes in and E911 views that as a high priority call, but the police department views that as a lower priority call, the police department is not going to respond as quickly as E911 may expect, or the reverse also happens as well, where the police may respond to something much more quickly because it views it as a higher priority. And then finally, we were not asked to look at the sheriff's office in particular. We looked at how the police department works with the sheriff's office. And one of the things that we did find is that there's good coordination and cooperation as it relates to the organized crime task force, but otherwise there is inconsistent levels of communication between the two departments and coordination and sort of different perceptions on how frequently those two departments are working together. So similar to the findings, there's a lot more recommendations that we lay out in the report, but I wanted to highlight some of the key recommendations here today that align with some of those findings that I just talked about. And our recommendations touch on the operations, the policies, procedures, training, and internal controls of the department. I mentioned that the department doesn't currently have the staff that it needs to meet its staffing plan. One of the first steps that the department needs to undertake is to is to review a large set of data, or a lot of different types of data to understand how we can better distribute its beat and precinct boundaries across the county. Looking at calls for service, the types of calls for service, how long it takes to respond to those different types of calls, and using that, working with either internally or with an external technical assistance provider to determine what its appropriate boundary should be for its beats and precincts, and how to better deploy its staff across those beats. As part of that effort, or related to that effort, also revisiting the current shift schedule. Is the 10-hour shift the one that best serves the department and its current staffing levels, or would an 8 or a 12-hour shift better suit it? On the right-hand side, we lay out some of the policy recommendations. And really the first step is going to be mapping out payroll and other human resources processes with DPS HR and with Big County HR. That getting clarity around who is responsible for what the flow of information should look like, and also identifying opportunities where technology could better improve those processes. Today, a lot of information is transferred back and forth through Word documents, Excel. It changes hands a lot of times in these processes, and if there are opportunities to make that more efficient, those should be identified. And then finally, DPS should work with E911 and the police department to update its policies and practices as it relates to communications, and how both of those departments respond to different types of calls for service. Again, how technology can be leveraged to track that information and look at that data going forward. At the bottom of the screen, I mentioned the performance management, and I have a slide in our appendix that we could look at if there's interest, but I think the core thing to think about with performance management in both the police department and HR, and really for all county departments, is that we want to see a connection between the county strategic plan, a department strategic plan, the initiatives and the priorities that the department is implementing to achieve that strategic plan, and then finally, what are the key performance indicators or KPIs that are being looked at to know whether you're making progress in that direction. So what we lay out in the report is a set of key performance indicators for both police and HR that roll up essentially and align with the different strategies and objectives that the department had in its strategic plan. As the plan is finalized for the future years, the department should revisit those KPIs and determine, are they the right ones to measure their objectives and their strategies going forward. I can switch over to the HR department, or I could pause if there are any questions on police.
Commissioners, yes, go ahead. Do you have any?
Thank you. This is a very detailed report. One of the questions I have is our police department is reviewed by the International Chiefs of Police on a regular basis or annual basis. I'm not sure how many years it's reviewed, but were some of the recommendations that came from the last review of that implemented in here or overlapped at any point as far as recommendations?
We looked at the last report from IACP, and that was part of the vast set of materials that we looked at in informing this. And we looked at the last report and looked at some of their key findings and some of the recommendations, and looked at, are all of those relevant today, or have some of them been implemented? Are there some that are still outstanding? And do the conditions today suggest that those recommendations should still move forward? So that is one of the pieces of information that we looked at in developing our recommendations.
Okay. But was there overlapping or same suggestions recommended, or?
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. I don't have it in front of me, but I think in particular some of the, I'd have to get back to it. I want to make sure I answer that correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I know since I've been here, maybe in the last 5 years, we went to the 10-hour shifts for, and implemented take-home cars and other benefits like that to help with efficiency and the shortage issue that we're facing for a while. So I would like to hear the feedback from the command staff and our chiefs to see, why are we now looking at maybe going back to 8-hour shifts, or why that was a suggestion or a finding with these recommendations.
So one thing I would mention is the way that the 10-hour shift has been implemented has meant that there's a 2-hour overlap between shifts. So it requires more officers to be to be active essentially in any given day. So part of the reassessment that we're suggesting for the 10-hour shift is both its implementation and ensuring that that's the right shift for the staffing levels of the department. And again, the department may go through that process and determine that is the correct one for any number of reasons. But as we think about staffing and as we think about its ability to meet its staffing plan, that is one of the areas that showed up as that should be reconsidered.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't realize that. So, well, thanks for the detailed report. Cobb County is the best. Cobb County's finest is right here. And I know there's always room for improvement, but we value our public safety and police.
We had fantastic participation from both departments and really appreciate both the willingness to share and to open up their data, but also their experiences, and really do commend both departments for how well they participated in this process.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We can continue.
Great. So switching to the HR department, similarly, there were a series of questions that came out of our first phase assessment that drove our research and our recommendations going forward. And similarly looking internally, does the department have the capacity that it needs to fulfill its responsibilities and its duties to all the different departments that it works with? Does the department's current and historical budget and staffing, or how does the department's budget and staffing compare to other similarly sized jurisdictions that have similar responsibilities? How well does it leverage performance data, both within its own operations, but also to help understand the human resources operations and functions of the county as a whole? Are there key positions or roles that the department could staff to increase the department's effectiveness? So not just adding X percent more staff, but are there key roles that could really have a bigger impact? What are the current policies and procedures, and how does that guide and direct the department's efficiency and effectiveness in its operations? And then finally as well, how does the Human Resources Department use technology, both again internally and to coordinate with other county departments? So one of the things that we found is that there really is not, unlike the police department, there's not a strong foundation of strategic planning, writing policies and procedures and training manuals. There's a lack of foundational documents in the HR department that compounded some of the challenges that it has had recently with staffing. The department experienced a significant amount of turnover in recent years. Some of that was related to retirements, as people with significant years of institutional knowledge retired from the department and took that knowledge with them essentially, but also the department has experienced a lot of turnover from people who are more recently hired, so voluntary resignation. So it was impacted by both those types of departures around the same time, and because the department does not have some of those foundational training documents and established policies and procedures, it created a significant vacuum within the department where the staff were working to cover for the positions that had been vacated, and really were contending with a significant backlog. The department has, in recent time, that put the department really in a crisis management and crisis response period. The department has not been able, in many cases, to think about the future and the future strategies and how to be a more strategic thinking and forward-thinking department, because it has had to contend with all of this turnover and making sure that it was getting its day-to-day responsibilities done. And since we started this work, though, the department has been able to fill all of those positions. I can't speak for exactly today, but my understanding was that the department was able to fill all of the positions. But now it's in a different type of situation where it's training those people, getting them up to speed, and making sure that they're able to be fully knowledgeable to do the job. But as that process is happening, the department is in a really great position now to be thinking about the future. How does it start thinking more strategically? How does it move and shift away from this crisis response period to tackle its backlog where there are backlogs, and to work more efficiently and more effectively with other county departments? one of the, as it's doing that, I think there are some training documents within the department, and there are some policies that are written, but many of them are outdated or just haven't been reviewed more recently. And there are certain functions too that don't have as many written materials as others do. So as the department moves forward and thinks about how to better protect itself in the future from these types of staffing changes, that is a core area that we looked at. The way that human resources is structured in Cobb County could actually add a lot of capacity to the department, but the way that it's currently implemented today limits that capacity. So there are department reps within each of the county departments, and within large departments where that's an established person, they may have HR training and background and experience. That relationship can work really well. That person has a dedicated role. In smaller departments where the department rep is taking on an additional responsibility, that there may be an administrative function, they're taking on more responsibilities, they may not have that specialized experience or training in their background, and they may only be spending an hour or a couple hours a week or a few hours a week on that role. And it ends up not being as productive and not adding as much capacity as it could otherwise, because the HR department has to both ensure that that person is doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, answering questions, and really depleting capacity on both sides. And then finally, one of the other things that we found is, and this is actually evolving in recent time, is that historically a lot of requests for exceptions, for really sort of routine HR requests, are going through the county manager's office as opposed to coming directly to the HR department and really to the HR director. And that is something that has started to change in recent time, but that is a historical pattern that has been inefficient. It's very paper-based. It adds in more steps and really delays getting those basic HR functions complete. Similar to the police department, the report lays out a number of recommendations, but I wanted to highlight four of them for you today that really tie to some of the challenges that I just discussed. And on the left-hand side, focusing really at the organizational structure and the staffing of the office, one of the first recommendations that we make is to shift 3 functions under an HR management and strategy division. So this is the system and records, employee development, and employee compliance and relations under one person. This could be the deputy director of the office. The idea is to bring those functions together to use the technology of the office to better develop performance management systems, again, internally and for the county as a whole, to encourage coordination and collaboration among those functions, and then also to be really shifting towards that more strategic thinking for the department. It would allow both the deputy director over that new division and the director as well to focus on how to revamp the office to be more strategic going forward. As one of the challenges I talked about was with the department reps and really where those roles do not necessarily add as much capacity as they could. We recommend that the HR department hire a department rep coordinator whose role and responsibility would be to develop some of these training materials, developing much more clarity around the roles and responsibilities and expectations of department reps, and working with them on a daily basis to answer questions, to support them in the role, and to provide both onboarding and ongoing training as they are in that role going forward. The department must establish some of these foundational materials that I was discussing at the beginning: a strategic plan, key performance indicators, and really a process for reviewing those, training materials, written policies and practices. Some of this exists in different forms, but there is not a comprehensive source of that information that is available both to the staff of the department and to the county more broadly. And so these will be really just integral to the department going forward as it navigates turnover and really trying to move away from being in a crisis position and dealing with its backlog and other issues. And then finally, continuing the work that has already been started to shift requests that are coming to the county manager's office back to the HR department. So requests for exceptions and other HR matters should come directly to the HR department, both to free up the county manager's time and to make sure that those requests are being tracked internally, and managed internally, and then also to be able to ensure that that they're responded to in a timely manner. Finally, I just want to mention on performance management, I talked about the framework that we recommend for all the departments, but specifically within the HR department, I've talked a little bit about the importance of, or the opportunity really the department has to look at data to manage its own operations, but also for the county as a whole. The information that the HR department has, in conjunction with some information from other departments, could tell the county a lot about its recruitment, its retention, its longevity, and really its efficiency and effectiveness in hiring, in posting job applications, in moving people through the interview process, to better understand those HR-related functions for the entire county, not just for the department itself. Any questions on HR before I go to the final slide?
Any questions, commissioners?
Great. So I mentioned I
We
just
have an
wanted to-
observation.
Oh, sure.
Just one thing. Our HR department does a great job with the programs for training like Excel and for supervisors and all of our employees. So from this, it sounds like they're doing a great job internally, but within the own department, they may need some assistance with the coordinator position that you were referring to and training each other or internally.
Yeah, I think it's protecting their own department as well as they're protecting the rest of the county is the need.
But they do a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
We have a lot of great programs for our employees to, that are available for them for more education and training and, management supervisor positions. So thank you.
So I mentioned at the outset that this was phase 2 of a multi-phase strategy. I just wanted to put really this slide up, which is if the county decides to move forward with additional assessments of additional departments, at the end of phase 1, when we prioritize police and HR for this round of assessments, we also suggested which departments should go forward under phase 3, as opposed to those that would maybe be assessed in future phases. So there are 5 that we identified for phase 3: community development, countywide management functions more generally, fire and EMS, and parks and property management. And so that, just wanted to bring that back to the board's attention as what the prioritization that we recommended at the end of phase 1. But this really is a conversation for the board to consider where they go from here with this project.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I want to thank you for the amount of time and effort that you took in providing this review, as well as thank our staff that had to work with you and provide information, whether it was objective paper data or subjective communication and providing response. Our goal at the end of the day was just to be able to see where we are as an organization and see if there are opportunities for us to improve so we can be as resourceful as possible. And certainly the recommendations that you provided today will help us do that as we consider them in our operation. So thank you very much. It was eye-opening, needless to say, where we have some opportunities, but I'm looking forward to seeing what we do with it, and I think the timing was perfect with our strategic plan.
Great. Thank you all so much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
So where do we go from here? That's for you to decide at a future date. What we plan to do is to bring the study back to you at a future meeting for you to accept the study. In the meantime, we will ask the 2 departments to prepare their response to the recommendations. So, and then we will provide that to you as well under separate cover, because it's good to check under the hood every now and then. If you just hop in the car and turn the key on forever and ever, you never know what's going on under the hood. So it's good to check under there every now and then.
Right.
I think both of these departments will tell you it's been very eye-opening, it has increased their self-awareness of their own departments. So if The Phase 3 is something that the board would like to consider at a future date. We have them queued up as far as which departments we can go, but that'll be a board decision at a future date.
Okay. So Phase 3 encompasses looking at other departments. However, with the recommendations, there were some that I think we can do internally, but there was a comment made about getting additional technical expertise to help with implementing some things. I don't know if this is something that PFM offers, or would we have to engage another party to consider how we implement some of the recommendations?
I think we can garner that from the responses from the two departments.
Okay.
I believe they will be able to understand their own abilities. And if there is something that's outside of that, we can make it a part of the recommendation that comes back to you.
Okay.
Okay?
Good. And then one last thing, Jimmy.
Yes, ma'am.
In each of the slides for the departments, it had performance measures associated, I presume, with the strategic plan. So are we going to be able to accomplish that with that other effort?
Yes, we will try to interweave those
Okay.
into the existing county strategic plan.
Okay.
Because the county strategic plan has always been intended to reach down into the different departments that already has that strategic plan. So it'll be our job to interweave those into a seamless doc.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate it. All right. Last but not least, we're going to hear from finance again and get some feedback with respect to our credit rating.
Well, good afternoon again. I have a short part of this. I just get to introduce the subject matter expert, Elise Lamel. She's been with us for a long time. PFM have been great partners. She helps us with our credit rating every year, as well as what we look out for long-term and impactful financial decisions. Their team has been great, and I think they've prepared a great presentation to really, for the first time, walk the board through what our credit presentation looks like and some of the criteria that we go through on an annual basis. So with that, Elise.
Zero. Oh, thank you. All right, good afternoon. As Bill mentioned, I'm Elise Lomel. I'm with PFM Financial Advisors. We've served as the county's financial advisors for a number of years. I've been with them since 2014, so it's going on 10 years now. Thank you for allowing me to be here and taking the time to listen to me today. I'll try and make it as quick and high level as possible. All right, quick overview of the topics for today. So we will focus on what credit ratings are, why they're important, how Cobb is rated, and how that compares to a peer group we came up with. And then a quick summary of the best practices regarding fund balance, which plays a really large part in entities' credit rating. All right. So when municipalities are going to issue debt, one of the things that they need is a credit rating. So they must apply to any number of rating agencies to get a credit rating, similar to an individual's credit score when you're applying for a loan. The rating is based on a number of factors, including economy, management, and financials, all which help determine the likelihood of the entity to repay that debt. The credit rating will ultimately determine market appetite and the interest rate on that debt as well. Cobb is rated by the three major rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, and has received a AAA rating from all three for the last 25 years or so. AAA rating is the highest rating possible, so congratulations, something to be extremely proud of. And as of August, actually I think this month I checked recently, there are only 3 counties in Georgia with 3 AAA ratings. It's Cobb, Gwinnett, and Columbia, and then only around 50 across the country. So it's a very elite group. The AAA rating is a representation to both the public and private sector of superior credit and ability to repay its debts. The value of this AAA rating comes in a lot of different ways. It lowers the county's interest costs on debt, estimated to have saved approximately $20 million in interest costs over the past 10 years. It increases and kind of secures market access, particularly during times of weaker economic conditions, and also signals a stable reputation to current and future stakeholders across the community in Georgia and across the nation. Like an individual's credit score, the worse the credit rating, the higher the borrowing rates. This is even more amplified in volatile markets. This graph shows the difference in interest rates associated with various credit ratings for the past 20 years. The difference here is referred to as a credit spread. In times of volatility, as I mentioned earlier, so where we may have a recession in 2009 and 2010, and then the jumble of the past 3 years, as you can kind of see the peaks and valleys since 2020 and the pandemic. You can see at those times the credit spreads between AAA and lower rated credits widen extremely as investors flock towards quality to minimize their risk. The AAA rating will always help you lower your interest costs, but particularly during these times. So these are just some of the strengths and weaknesses as highlighted by each of the rating agencies in their most recent reports on the county, all of which were solidified in the summer of this year. Not going to read through each one of these, but in summary, the strengths of Cobb are its broad and diverse economy and tax base, strong management in both its staff and elected leadership, strong financials, and then relatively low long-term liabilities. They do point out the pension and OPEB burden as a potential sign of weakness, but overall a very strong AAA. They also point out increased labor costs and declining commercial values as potential weaknesses, but those are really kind of across the board and not specific to just Cobb County. All right. Yes.
Can we go back to that slide?
We can.
Thank you.
And these are pulled just directly from the rating reports.
Okay, can you refer to that last bullet under Fitch ratings, that weakness?
Yes, there's really, when they have nothing to point to as a sign of a potential weakness, they put this in there. And it's obviously, if your financials were to reduce significantly, that would be pressure on the rating. So I mean, I think that's just kind of a given.
Okay, that's interesting. And then under Moody's, that second bullet under weaknesses, do we have a different ratio than most governments from
No, so I think,
commercial and
I mean, it does vary, but
residential?
that's really applicable across the nation. It's not specific to Cobb. It's applicable
Okay.
across Metro Atlanta for sure. I would say most metro areas where they do have that commercial office space that is becoming kind of more vacant, but that's across
Okay.
the country.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. Okay, so as Bill mentioned, prior to visiting with the rating agencies every year, PFM prepares a detailed credit assessment of the county's credit from each rating agency, looking at the most recent audited financials. We do this to help determine kind of what areas of strengths or improvements we want to highlight to the rating agencies, but also to highlight any red flags or potential forthcoming red flags so that we can be proactive in addressing those both internally and externally. So for the purposes of the presentation today, we're going to focus solely on Moody's. Because A, they are the most straightforward, which isn't saying a whole lot, and then B, they also provide peer data so that we can pull together a peer comparison that's not available from S&P or Fitch. All right, in determining an issuer's credit rating, Moody begins with developing a scorecard based on several factors: economy, financial performance, institutional framework, and leverage. Just as a point of note, institutional framework is the same for all counties in Georgia. Y'all all score a AAA, and that kind of just varies by state and by municipality. But all counties in Georgia are AAA. Some of the sub-factors here include full value per capita, median household income, fund and cash balances, and then long-term liabilities. Each factor is assigned a weight, and then each sub-factor based on its weighting is assigned a score or value. The total score produces an indicated rating, but that is not a final rating. The indicated rating is then subject to some quantitative notching adjustments, of which Cobb is not receiving any, and we'll walk through those in just a minute, but also is subject to some more qualitative subjective considerations, which Cobb is absolutely receiving here. So this is an example of kind of what we put in the credit assessment. This is one way we show the Moody's scorecard. This is comparing the FY21 weighted scores for each sub-factor and factor compared to FY22. This helps kind of easily see which categories have improved or worsened, so we know what to kind of dig into. You can see the different categories on the left, and as you move to the right, you can see the different weights for each year. As mentioned earlier, this only produces an indicative rating. The final rating is then adjusted based on notching factors, which y'all are receiving none. You can see the line item 0 there, and then other considerations are in play. So the indicative rating for both FY21 and FY22 for Cobb was AA2, with the final rating still maintained at AAA. This is very normal. A lot of our AAA ratings will have a AA1, AA2, sometimes even AA3. We don't like to go there, but and then still wind up at a AAA rating based on some of these underlying factors. There were a number of categories that improved from FY21 to FY22, all of which are highlighted in green, with the final score of FY22 creeping closer to that AA1 threshold. The main areas of improvement were in financial performance and leverage. The improvements in financial performance were due to an increase in both fund and cash balances, while the improvements to leverage are a little more in the weeds. Moody's applies a certain discount rate to pension and OPEB, and that changed, which improved y'all's scores there, but also the total revenues, which is the denominator, and that helped as well because that increased. Right. As I just mentioned, both the available fund balance and liquidity ratios improved from FY21 to 22. But the rating categories are still kind of the AA and BAA respectively, so lower than that AAA threshold. Here we've laid out how Moody's looks at these two ratios. Each of the rating agencies has different ways of calculating their fund and cash balances, so we've laid out how Moody's looks at it here. I'm going to try and keep this high level and not get too far in the weeds, but if you have any questions on how to try and answer them or follow up afterwards. So based on Moody's calculations, Cobb's available fund balance is nearly 32% of revenues, which falls in Moody's AA category. The threshold for AAA is 35% or above. I do want to note that the first line item, the unrestricted governmental fund balance, includes available, committed, assigned, committed, and unassigned fund balances for all governmental funds. The county's liquidity balance, the second box there, is about 15.5%, which falls in the BAA category. The AAA category is 40% or above. Here, Moody's only looking at unrestricted cash, and the county has kind of reclassified things from unrestricted to restricted over the past few years that are not getting factored into the scorecard. However, Moody's does kind of take those into consideration in those other qualitative considerations that we'll get into in just a minute. All right. So these are the other considerations I was just referring to in order to get Cobb from that AA2 to the AAA final rating. The first, and we've tried to highlight them in green, the positive ones, and then I'll touch on the red one in just a minute. But the first is the fund-specific financial considerations, and this is kind of what I just mentioned with the available fund balance and cash calculations. When Moody's does these calculations, they pull them exactly from the audited financials to do apples-to-apples comparison across municipalities. The thing is municipalities don't necessarily report in the same way. So there may be some funds that are not getting incorporated into the scorecard. For example, you all have restricted fund balances in your debt service funds that are only used to be able to pay debt service, which the rating agency should obviously consider. So those are considered as some of the underlying qualitative considerations to get you up to that AAA. Two other positive considerations are strengths related to economic concentration, which I've already stated y'all have a broad and diverse economy and tax base, really, really strong there. And then also management strategy. They've highlighted a number of times, both Moody's and the other rating agencies in their reports about how strong the county's management is with both strong budgeting practices and maintaining your financial policies and adhering to those. All of these considerations are important in getting the county to that AAA rating. We did highlight the unusual risk or benefit posed by long-term liabilities just because they do note the OPEB burden, but it's not really bringing it down here. It's just something we wanted to make sure to note. All right, so here we have another form of the scorecard where we are really just highlighting the sub-factors that are not in the AAA category. In economy, full value per capita is still very strong and higher than peers and national medians, but just not technically in that AAA category. Nothing to be concerned about there. Nothing really to be concerned about on all of these. I do want to preface that. As mentioned earlier, fund balance and liquidity are not quite in that AAA category either. Moody's does exclude certain funds because of their apples-to-apples approach, but those are factored into the other considerations as we just walked through. And then I already touched briefly on long-term liabilities, and the county's attempting to address that, so we're not going to touch on that any further. Okay, so the following slides are some peer comparisons based on some of these factors and sub-factors that we've discussed. The peers consist of a handful of AAA counties, AAA metro counties in the southeast, along with some like DeKalb and Fulton, and who are not technically AAA, but we do consider those peers considering the metro Atlanta area. So looking at the economy subfactor, you can see Cobb compares really well to peer and AAA medians, even slightly outperforming in some areas. Looking at financial performance, Cobb does lag a bit compared to peer and AAA medians, more so when looking at liquidity than fund balance, but still fairly strong. Cobb's at 32% for fund balance and 15.5% for liquidity. And then looking at the leverage data, which is the last kind of factor other than that institutional framework score, Cobb nearly outperforms the AAA medians and peers across the board, but does slightly lag, I think, that peer median when it comes to fixed cost ratios. So all in all, kind of really comparable when compared to the peers and AAA medians. All right, and in conclusion, so I know we've covered the county's credit as a whole, but we really wanted to summarize best practices as it relates to fund and cash balances because it's such a heavily weighted factor, not only in Moody's, but across all three rating agencies, and it's something the county can fairly easily control. So in summary, and as I'm sure you were already aware, fund balance is critical in determining the credit rating. It shows strong management, financial resiliency, and stability in times of uncertainty. It also has helped eliminate the use of TANs, which the rating agencies didn't necessarily consider TANs a bad thing, but not having them is definitely a credit positive. So being able to do away with them and maintain that fund balance to get you through the end of the year is definitely a credit positive towards rating agencies. The county's commitment to maintaining its fund and cash balances has contributed significantly to the AAA ratings, not only in the financial performance portion of the scorecard, but in other consideration when it comes to management and fund considerations. I don't know if you'll recall, but when we were on the verge of losing the AAA several years ago, it was due to a potential budget shortfall. Y'all were able to resolve that and keep that AAA. And we did that through proactive communication with the rating agencies as well. Additionally, the county's practice of establishing a formal policy and adhering to it is noted by the rating agencies as a major strength, but it's also a best practice established by GFOA. So I commend you all for your practices related to fund balance and cash and management so far. The one other thing to note is that post-pandemic, all rating agencies have noted that they saw an increase in fund balance and liquidity levels, which I think we were all a bit surprised of originally, but that has really increased across the board nationally. Not only will these higher levels help improve credit quality, but they will also help create additional stability for local governments with the increasing costs and uncertainty given the current environment in the nation and the market and across the world. So that is all I had for you today. Can you answer any questions?
Any questions or comments? Thank you for reviewing this with us. It's been eye-opening. I know we speak on a pretty high level with respect to our credit rating and the decisions we make that can impact it, but this is the first time we get to see in a detailed perspective specifically what a rating agency is looking at as they determine our credit rating. So certainly insightful.
Thank you.
For us. Yes.
And this is 26 years in a row?
This is 26. Yes.
Thanks to our staff as well. Good job.
Yes.
So,
Virgil was here for some of those years.
absolutely, absolutely.
He's already gone.
How many others have had that kind of track record with the AAA rating?
Gwinnett has had it for a while. Y'all were first, I think, but I think Gwinnett was shortly after. Columbia has not had it nearly as long.
Okay.
There are a few other counties in Georgia that have like 1 or 2 AAAs, but y'all are the only one of 3 that have all 3. I want to say probably the longer standing ones that are comparable to you are probably in Virginia and Maryland, Arlington or Fairfax County. I think they've had it for maybe since like 1975 or something.
wow.
So a long time, but we'll get there.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, we know, again, our credit rating is due to the great job that our finance department does in shoring up our information as we're making decisions, make sure that we're making decisions that not only impact the agenda item, but some of the longer-term considerations and certainly the annual credit rating. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Buddy and team. Thank you to all of our managers, too, for helping keep us on track. And thank you, commissioners, for helping to make those tough decisions at times that impact our credit rating.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I believe this concludes our work session for today. We will convene again at 7:00 p.m. for our regular meeting. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.